Welcome to Scrolling to Death. Today, I am grateful to be joined by writer, producer, multiple New York Times bestselling author, and co-director of the award-winning documentary film Anxious Nation, Laura Morton. Hi, Laura.
Hey, Nicki. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course, I'm so grateful to have you today to talk about youth anxiety. That's what we're going to focus on today. And this generation, coined by Jonathan Haidt as the anxious generation. So that's sort of been a buzzword that parents are worried about or experiencing anxiety in their children. This really all started before COVID. Anxiety, depression, and suicide in youth has skyrocketed over the past decade. And what I learned primarily or firstly from the documentary is that for you, this is really personal. And so can you speak a little bit to what led you to focus so much of your energy on exploring what youth are going through related to anxiety?
Sure. Well, I want to first say that the name of the film is Anxious Nation. And because I feel that the issue is not just with our youth. I think we have a generation of very anxious parents raising a generation of very anxious kids.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a much bigger problem than just the kids. I think it's a mistake, and the wrong way to look at it is to just hinge it on this generation coming up. Anxiety has been around since antiquity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's in our DNA. It's how we're supposed to feel in certain situations. And there are things that heighten that anxiety. The reason why I made the film is because I'm a parent of an anxious child.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that I was failing miserably as a parent because I couldn't figure out the anxiety. I didn't recognize the behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Up until I made the film Anxious Nation, I actually didn't even think I had a lot of anxiety, but it would take making a film about anxiety for me to recognize that I do have anxiety. And frankly, I don't know anybody who doesn't these days.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, while I think that Jonathan's message is important,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's misleading. I'm a storyteller by trade. As you mentioned, I'm an author.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a storyteller by trade. And I thought what was happening in my home was only happening in my home because in 2018, when I had the idea to do the film, nobody was talking about this. And there was so much shame and stigma around our families struggling in any way, right? But especially in a mental health way.
Yeah.
That nobody was talking about it. So I put a single line post on Facebook in 2018. It was in November of 2018. One line, kids and anxiety, who's dealing with it?
Mm-hmm.
And I was stunned. I suppose if social media has a silver lining, in many ways it can be connective, right? I was stunned at the response that I got, Nicki, because I was hearing from people that were my friends, not just my Facebook friends, not people I haven't seen for 25 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
But people that I had dinner with recently who had never shared with me that their child had attempted to take their own life.
Wow.
That they had never shared with me that their child was in a program, for their depression. Not just in therapy, but like really severe things happening. And we just weren't talking about it. And because I'm a storyteller by trade, I knew this was more than a book. I knew that we had to somehow tell the story of not just, families that live on the East Coast and West Coast, but families all over the country because it does show up differently for different people. It shows up, anxiety is not a one size fits all, right? Which makes it so hard to treat and to identify.
Right.
Because it's a shapeshifter. So what made my daughter anxious when she was 7 or 8 no longer makes her anxious, but there's a whole new set of anxieties that creep in as she, has gone into her teenage years. And so, as a parent, it's frustrating. And especially if you don't realize or recognize what you're dealing with. And in 2018, 2019, the pediatricians weren't even talking about it. So you would take her in and I would take her in. You were not taking in my child. I was, but I would take her in and they would be like, well, how's your diet? And, and I was just like, wow, something is really disconnected here. And I wanted to really understand it. What I wanted to know when I set out to make the film was this: are we a more anxious nation or are we just more aware of it? Right? Because we were starting to hear rumblings going into that, right? And I think in a post-COVID world, I think there's no doubt, no question that we are actually both. We are a more anxious nation and we are more aware of it.
Yeah.
And being more aware of it certainly is a good thing as long as we're doing the right things. to help set expectations and manage those emotions and those feelings when they show up.
Yeah. One thing that was fascinating was the discussion around genetics versus environment, and you already mentioned, how parents' anxiety can play into this, and you explored how much genetics play into the child's anxiety issues versus their upbringing and caregiving. And there was a quote. Genetics are the gun, environment is the trigger. And specifically within their environment, I found it fascinating to learn how strong of an influence that anxious parent can have on their child. So, can you speak to that? Like how our
Sure.
anxieties as parents can imprint on our children.
Totally. I think, it's a hard film for a lot of parents to watch because it really holds up the mirror, right?
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
such an easy thing to point to our phone and go, here's the problem. And
Mhm.
it's a much harder thing to go, here's the problem,
Yeah,
pointing at
as a parent,
ourselves,
right?
right?
Totally.
It's a much harder thing to do because we're human. So
Mhm.
let's just look at the phone and our devices and say, well, that's the problem. Let's just get rid of that and that'll solve the problem. And it won't,
Mhm.
because we've always been an anxious nation, right?
Yeah, yeah.
We're a more anxious nation today. But what I think was so interesting is that we show it in the film. We have
Mm,
parents
big
in the
time.
film
Mhm.
who you can watch it and it'll make you really uncomfortable because you
Mhm.
will either go, "Oh wow,
Mhm.
that's me,"
Uh-huh.
or you'll be like, "Oh, I mean, that's not me,"
No,
right?
right, right, right.
And so I think what we were so lucky that the families that participated, including my own, were really vulnerable
Yeah, really.
and raw and willing to share in the hopes of creating a conversation and a dialogue around the greater good, right?
Mhm.
Let's talk about this because having the hard conversations are hard, but they're
Mhm.
necessary. And
Yeah.
so it was really important to understand. I always thought when I set out to make this film, my premise, my hypothesis was this, that we have a generation of anxious parents who never dealt with their own anxiety because their parents never recognized it, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
It
right.
was just swept under the rug.
Mhm.
What we now know is that we don't want our kids to feel the way that we do. So,
Mhm.
in order to help our kids not feel anxious, we actually add more to the problem than we do solve it.
Mhm.
And we show that over and over and over. There's a great scene in the film where the father talks about going to school with his son, who had a lot of school anxiety, and sitting in the classroom with him. There were many days, and I know a lot of parents can relate to this, where they literally had to rip him out of the car. He would hold on to the
Mhm.
headrest,
Mhm.
and they would have to rip him out of the car because he just didn't want to go to school.
Yeah.
But the parents didn't have the right tools at the time. The way that they responded and the way that they acted, they came from this sort of tough love
Mhm.
perspective,
Yeah.
and so they didn't have the right words, and they didn't have the right knowledge to help their son move through those emotions,
Mhm.
and to give him the tools so that when he started to feel that way, that he
Mhm.
could recognize it and do something about it in their absence, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And, ultimately, he went on to learn those tools, and he's been doing fantastic. I'm very happy to say that all the kids in our
Yeah.
film are doing extremely well in their lives.
That was what I was wondering because a lot of it was kind of uncomfortable to watch. Some of those scenes where the parent was kind of putting a lot of pressure on the child or pushing that anxiety feeling onto the child. And so, how did they share that was to watch back? Like, was it revealing to
So I
them
know
to
the
watch
scene
it?
that you're referring to is Jackie and Cooper on the sofa.
I think so. Yeah.
Yes, and
Yes.
we're just talking about acting.
Yes.
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 So
Man.
I will tell you that I'm actually friends with the mom,
Hmm.
and I called her and I said, "Listen, I think that we should take this scene out of the film. I
Hmm.
don't wanna
Yeah.
make you the most hated mom in America,"
Uh
you
huh.
know? And she paused and she said, "I think you have to leave it in."
Oh, wow.
Because I think it's really important for parents to see. She goes, "I know who I am, and I'm
Hmm.
working on it. I'm not perfect, and I'm not even in pursuit of perfection because what a
Yeah.
moot thing as a parent, right?"
Hmm.
But she said, "I think it's really important for parents to see this because it isn't just this mom
Hmm.
talking for if you haven't seen the movie, the mom is talking to her daughter about going on auditions and how she could have done better and that the mom would have nailed every single one of them and,
Yeah. Boy.
really putting all this pressure on. But
Yeah. Yeah.
we see it every day on sports fields. We see it academically.
Hmm.
We have dads or moms on the sidelines screaming at their kids when they don't make a basket or don't hit a home run or don't make,
Hmm.
kick a goal or whatever their sport is, and it's no different. And I think that we have put these expectations on our children to be who we want them to be
Mhm.
without allowing them to be who they are. And I that was a big lesson for me with my own daughter in making this film.
And so it's about kind of breaking the cycle. And you talk about how early childhood experiences they create imprints within us, like a script, and it's like a mental movie we make about who we are and what the world is. And so parents with these younger children have a real opportunity to imprint healthy behaviors and healthy coping strategies within their children. And, we'll get to tips at the end, but I know that the tough time, the big transition is like the elementary school to middle school time. And I learned in lots of different books that I've read about how sensitive those years are. That's why a lot of the social media access is people are saying push through, get through middle school without access to that. So what did you learn specifically about that time period, elementary to middle, how their peers start to have a heavy influence? Like, why is that time period so important?
Well, it's critical, and now more than ever because our kids are hearing so much more, seeing so much more.
Mhm,
Families tend to have, even if their kids don't have access to their phones, the
mhm.
conversations around the dinner table are tough these days, right?
Yeah,
If the news is on the news cycle, what's happening. You and I are talking, here. It's in July of 2025, but
mhm,
there's this horrific situation in Texas right now with the
yeah,
flooding, and
mhm,
I have a daughter that went to summer camp for many, many years, and I can't even imagine. But
yeah,
what I wanna say to your question is the body keeps the score, right? It's one of the best books I've read when it comes to
mhm,
understanding what happens with our children, especially when they've faced and dealt with
mhm,
trauma. And you may not think that your child's dealt with trauma, and it certainly isn't all trauma-based,
mhm.
but kids have more trauma than we give credit to, right? One of the kids in our film was a student at Sandy Hook
Right.
when the shooting happened.
Mhm,
Didn't have any issues until she went off to college because she never dealt with those emotions and that
mhm,
trauma that had happened, and when she went off to college, it really impacted her. And she also had another situation happen with shortly after the shooting at Sandy Hook, her father decided to run in the Boston Marathon,
mhm.
and as he was crossing the finish line, the second bomb went off
Oh
during
my
the
gosh.
marathon.
Yeah, right.
And he was fine, but the kids experienced not just a school shooting, but this
Mhm,
bombing. Now that's extreme, right?
mhm, mhm,
And yet, my daughter, when we moved to California from New York, now we moved from New York to California.
mhm,
And my I kept telling her, "Hey, your school, you could see the ocean. It's going to be great. You eat lunch outside." It was like a whole different experience than she had in New York. And
yeah.
the only thing she wanted to know at 10 was, what is the school security like?
Oh my gosh. Because of
You
all the
know,
news around school shootings
they could
or
also have school shooter drills now,
Mhm,
and they have if you don't think that that's imprinting your kid,
mm,
it is.
right.
Every bit as much as everything else that we're talking about imprinting our kids these days, right?
Mhm,
But these things become embedded in their thoughts, and if you're an anxious kid, what do? You go to the catastrophic thinking. You're always going to the worst case scenario.
mhm,
And,
mhm,
how do you process that as a child? And yet the schools are doing what they need to do. I think it would be so great if we could start looking at our mental health and our physical health as one and the same,
mhm,
and not separate above the neck and below the neck. I think it
mhm.
would be amazing that when we take our kids into the pediatrician, that they don't wait until they're 12 to say, "How are you feeling? Do you feel
Yeah,
anxious?" Right?
yeah, right.
Because you're seeing it in kids that are 5, 6, 7, 8,
Mhm,
and all the way up.
yeah.
My daughter was 3 when she started showing signs of anxiety, and I couldn't fee I thought my daughter had the happiest,
Mhm,
like, I could not understand what was making her anxious, and that was a little bit of the problem,
yeah,
because I had every expert saying it's physical, when
yeah.
in fact it wasn't, it was emotional, and even the therapist that I took her to were like, "Wow, this is pretty young." Today, I think this would be a different story, right? My daughter's 17 now, but, I think when parents don't understand what they're dealing with, A,
Mhm, mhm,
and B, they understand it because they're dealing with it but have never dealt with it,
mhm.
right? They haven't learned the
Yeah,
tools.
right,
It's
right.
very hard to parent by teaching your child the tools, right?
When you
Putting
don't
those
have
tools in
them.
school when you don't have them.
Right. You see that all the time, like repeating of behaviors and habits that they did not enjoy as a child. And you're like, it to from the outside, you're like, "Isn't it obvious? Just don't do that thing that you didn't like growing up." And for
But it's all
some
we know.
reason, it's all they know. Right.
It's all we know. It's some families are really like, that's just the way it is in their family,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And then we talk about this in the film, when you've got one parent who actually is doing the disorder, right?
Mhm.
Like, who is adding because they feel the way that their child does, and you've got one parent who's a tough love parent,
Mhm.
and when they clash,
Yeah.
the real victim in all of that is the child,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Because they don't know, am I right? Am I wrong? Is this good? Is this bad? Should I
Mhm.
be feeling this way? Shouldn't I be feeling this? They have no idea because they're getting mixed messages, right?
Right, right. Okay. And I wanna get into kind of the hope. The film ends with hope and tools and how we break the cycle and all of that, but I do first wanna touch on social media and the role that it plays here because that's what really this podcast is about,
Right.
and was so grateful to see the time you spent on it. You explored how kids at these ages look outward for validation, and, one child in the documentary said, quote, "You live in a world now, you pick up your phone, it's Instagram and Twitter, you're comparing yourself to everything, to people winning in the social media industry. They're constantly shown by social media that they're not good enough. They're constantly comparing their body and their character, and it affects everything. So I believe social media is playing a huge role in affecting how these children are struggling with these anxiety symptoms and even depression or self harm or suicidal
Yeah.
ideation. Tell me more about what you've learned about the effects of social media and how it's playing a factor here.
I think that there's no question that social media has added to an already existing problem, right?
Hmm.
In the same way that COVID poured gasoline on the already burning inferno,
Yeah.
I think that with the advent and introduction of social media in our devices, and it's not that long ago,
Hmm.
I think that we certainly have seen spikes. So there's correlation for sure. I think there's a divide between correlation and causation. And anybody, Jonathan talks about that. There's lots of people that will talk about
Yeah.
the divide between correlation and causation.
Yes.
What correlation does, is it takes an already existing issue and heightens it and makes it worse.
Okay. Right.
I had a therapist, we talk about this a lot, but there's a therapist in the film, Lynn Lyons, who's so fantastic in the movie. I think she is just easy to listen to, and she talks about things in a super easy way to understand.
Hmm.
But she talks about this notion of when we're so busy putting out the fires, we very rarely get to the arsonist. What's
Hmm.
causing those fires, right?
Hmm.
I think it's really important to take a look at the whole picture. But I think social media is a big problem. I think
Hmm.
parents have used. I've made this mistake as a parent. We used an iPad, to babysit when my daughter was younger, and I mean there were things that I wouldn't let her watch, right, and things I
Right.
wouldn't let her do. But for sure, she became addicted to having that screen. And my daughter inherently, to this day, I don't own an iPhone. I'm an Android user.
Hmm.
Okay, but
Yeah.
somehow my daughter knew how to work an iPhone instinctively. What
Right.
does that tell you?
Right.
My nanny had, my I had we had, because I'm a single mom, I had some help, and
Hmm.
my nanny had an iPhone, and my daughter knew how to use an iPhone just like it was just learning how to walk or talk. Listen, I feel and have felt this for a very long time that holding the end user fully responsible for this,
Hmm.
again, is irresponsible.
Yeah.
I think
Agree.
I think it's irresponsible. I think I've talked a lot about Section 230. I'm sure you've talked about it on your
Hmm.
show.
Yep.
The companies are culpable, and they need to be held accountable.
Yeah.
And I think that because, and it's a sad statement, but it's a true statement, tech is so deep in the pockets of our politicians
Mhm.
that Section 230 is never getting overturned. Trump and Obama only shared one thing in common. One, they both tried to overturn Section 230
Hmm.
and couldn't do it. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
That's
Right.
everything you need to know.
That is what needs to happen to fix all of this. And, I feel ya. I'm going to keep a smidgen of hope. I know that there's still some politicians talking about it, but as we've seen, nothing gets passed federally. Nothing. So,
Listen, in our film, Nikki, I have to tell you, this conversation
mhm,
predates social media. Okay.
mhm,
Section 230 predates social media.
right.
It wasn't
Yeah,
why it was created,
I
right?
know.
When we were making Anxious Nation, I had audio. Think about this, okay? I had audio of Eleanor Roosevelt talking about the mental health crisis in America.
Oh, wow.
And every administration since
Mhm,
then has talked about it. Kennedy shut down the asylums. okay? Because he wanted to make a better system. And
Mhm.
when we talk about the system, we talk about the system being broken, but at the end of the day, the system was never set up right.
Mhm.
It's not a broken system. It's just it's a system. We talk about this a little bit in the film. It's a system that was never set up right. And it certainly wasn't set up expecting the demand that we are now putting on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
But
Mhm.
because we don't treat mental health the same as we do physical health, we limit mental health visits. We limit access. We limit resources. We put this on. Listen, you've got this game of parents, saying, pushing their kid off to school, going, you teach them the tools. And you've got school going, like,
Here's an
not our
iPad.
job. Right. Right.
Right.
Here's an iPad. Here's a
Yeah.
Chromebook.
Mhm.
Right. My daughter, who's become a mental health advocate and does a lot of work with like UCLA and
Wow.
Lady Gaga's foundation, Born This Way. She's been asked to speak all over, and she did a you'll be interested in this because you live in California. She was at the California School Board Association annual conference.
Okay. Mhm.
I was like persona non grata. All they wanted to do was talk to my kid because she represents what they're trying to figure out, right? And
Okay,
they
good.
asked her, you'll be very interested to hear this. Somebody stood up and asked her, "What do you think about taking phones out of the classroom?"
Oh
And
gosh, what did she say?
she said, "I don't think it's the answer, and let me tell you why."
Okay.
She said, "As it is, I have to check my phone when I go into certain classes. So, in essence, I don't have my phone when I'm in the classroom." She's like, "But I have teachers who don't want to police it. They absolutely don't want the hassle of dealing with the students who are like, 'I'm not giving you my phone.' The teachers have their phones." And
Yeah.
she said, I talked earlier about my daughter and her fears of school shootings, and she said, "And for me, if there were an incident at school and I didn't have my phone, I would not be able to call my mom. I wouldn't be able to reach out." She's like, "I don't need my phone to be on social media all day." She's like, "But I think that there's a way to create a system where we don't have it while we're learning, but
Mhm.
we're able to access it and have it on campus." And I thought that was a reasonable 16-year-old response. By the way,
Yeah.
standing ovation, and these were the school board members.
Okay, good. I will say that teachers should never be enforcing of any phone policy. It should be the bell to bell policy is what it should
Mhm,
be. They
mhm.
should be handing it over or putting it in a pouch when they walk into the school if it's because it doesn't work with the teachers enforcing
It
it.
does
It
not,
doesn't
and that's what her school.
support
Yeah,
healthy relationships between students and teachers. And the school shooting thing, and we don't need to go too far into it, but there's so many reports of kids in school shooting situations bringing attention to themselves because of their phones or causing more chaos because of the
they
phones.
can hear the phone dinging and
Hear the
right,
phone
yeah,
dinging, it lights up in a
yeah,
dark room, and
yeah.
kids are just safer in that situation without the phone. But I mean, I fully understand, and that is the number one pushback from parents and also teenagers apparently on needing that phone to feel safe and let their mom know they're okay, which
Yeah,
is totally valid too. So that's a tough,
and
tough
especially for an anxious
thing.
child, right? Especially for
Right,
an anxious child,
right,
and
right.
that's a safety net. I think that a bell to bell, it will be interesting, but here's what I think you won't see, and we can debate this.
Yeah.
It's not gonna solve the problem. We're not gonna have lower incidences of anxiety because the kids are still gonna be on the phones outside of the classroom, which is where that anxiety brews. On
Mhm.
social media, when they compare themselves to other people, FOMO,
Yeah.
all of I don't have to spell it out for you,
Yeah.
but I don't think you're gonna see lower rates of mental health in
I wanna say that having several hours less of access to social media and those anxiety-driven platforms will be helpful, but then they have school-issued devices where they're getting on all those platforms anyways, and which is
exactly.
a separate thing that I work on is trying to make tech safer that they're being given by the school. Let
Look,
me bring
I
us
just read today that TikTok
Yeah,
is creating a new version because allegedly they will be sold,
yeah,
and they're
right.
creating a new version of TikTok, and it'll
Yes.
be really interesting to see what that new version is and is not.
Yeah, I'm interested in that too. I have literally the article in my to-do list to read. So I
Yeah.
can't speak to it yet, but one more thing about anxiety and social media use. It might be the same therapist that you mentioned. She said in the film, anxiety thrives in isolation. That's where it gets its power. So when you're left alone with your phone or with social media and your thoughts, worrying, feeling these feelings by yourself, it's no surprise that all these kids move towards depression. It's a solo activity, and that's why I often advise parents, even from a young age, like solo media use isn't healthy for
You're
kids.
right.
And there's
Yeah,
really no age
totally.
where that goes away for me.
But even when the kids are together, like, they could all be in a room. My daughter has, her girlfriends. By the way, my daughter was the worst offender on
Mhm.
social in the film.
Mhm, mhm,
In all fairness, it was during COVID when
mhm.
she was showing her hours, but,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
she was the worst offender in the film, and we've had our issues with things that have happened online with her and,
Mhm,
scary stuff.
mhm.
And, now at 17, she understands it better, right? And I think what's interesting is I think you are seeing a movement of a lot of younger kids who are going social free
Yeah.
because they understand that it has done damage, which I love. If you really break this down, what we are talking about is the crisis of loneliness and isolation,
Mhm. Right.
and with anxiety and depression being byproducts of that.
Mhm.
And,
That's why the
I love
chatbot companies are saying we're gonna cure loneliness by
I mean,
being more online with a
that
bot.
I mean, AI, you name it, right? And it's really scary because people are falling into that world. And this is not a surprise. This is not new. This has been happening for a long time, right?
Yeah, yeah.
We've all been exposed and using AI for many, 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 many years. You don't realize it when you go on Open Table, that's AI, right?
Mhm, mhm,
And, but there's a convenience factor to certain things. That lack of connection. This summer, my daughter, she's spending the summer in upstate New York, and she is doing an internship, and I made her get a job because
mhm.
she's at that age, right?
Yeah, cool.
What I'm so happy about is that the activities that she's doing, her internship is giving house tours. I don't know if you're a Hamilton fan at all.
My kids like it and they watch it with their dad, but I not really my thing.
She's giving house tours at the Schuyler Mansion, the
Okay.
Schuyler sisters, where they
Okay.
grew up,
Yeah.
okay? And then she works in retail. She works so she has to have that interaction.
Mhm,
"Hi, welcome to the store. How can I help you?
mhm.
Oh, let me get that dress for you."
Yeah.
Or, "Let me tell you, about this family and how they lived in
Mhm.
this home, during an era," right? That
Yeah.
interaction, that connection, you have to put your kids in these circumstances for them to understand the value of it.
Mhm.
When I sent my daughter to summer camp, she never understood the value of it. When she stopped going is when she understood it,
Right. Sure.
right?
Of course.
And so I feel, and what I'm so happy about is she's off her phone. She can't be on her phone when she's working.
Mhm.
I love that. So I think as a parent, without making them feel bad,
Mhm.
right? They're just doing what kids do.
Mhm.
And,
Right.
I think there are ways to guide them and move them toward other things where we know they're getting life skills that they need to go out into the world.
Was there anything you'd do differently regarding access and device access if you could go back?
Yeah, the answer for yeah, for sure I would. For sure I would. I gave my daughter a phone way too early again. I'm not making an excuse. I'm just telling it how it
Yeah.
is, right?
Yeah.
I am a single mom. I travel a lot for my job, and I did not want my daughter to always have to go through someone else to call me.
Mhm.
I wanted her to have access to me, right?
Yeah, of
So I
course.
gave her a phone really early.
Mhm.
And I think if I could do that over, I might not have given her a phone so early and certainly not a smartphone.
Mhm.
And right, I still have like up in my office when there was a little period of time where my daughter could only use the flip phone.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right,
Right.
because
Yep.
they just didn't want her online, and it was
Yeah.
fine, and I
Yeah.
love all of these companies that are popping up
Mhm.
that are encouraging that, because I don't think the phone is the enemy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think the phone is the enemy. I think we as parents have to do a better job in expressing what is good about this and what is, harmful about
Mhm.
this.
Yeah.
And do it in a way. I remember going to see somebody speak about this, and, she was just saying, like, if you're a phone-free home, okay, somebody, raised their hand and said, "Yeah, but what do you do when all the other kids come over?"
You tell them that I mean, this just happened to me. My 9-year-old's friend came over and I said, "We don't let kids use phones here, so you can leave it." She had an iPhone on the
Right,
table. If you need to call
yeah,
your mom or dad, you can do that, but it stays on the table.
right, but at 9, that's an easy thing. At 15 and 16, not so easy, right?
I'll
And
try.
and well, and the concern is, right,
Yeah.
from the kid's point of view is my friends will never wanna come over.
Mhm.
So where's that middle ground, right? And so
That's true.
and the answer, by the way, that she gave was not a great answer, and it was somebody well known, and I don't wanna say who, but listen, there are things that as parents, we're trying to deal with and cope with and understand. We didn't grow up with those devices. We didn't, but we all use them, I think, as religiously. Well, I don't wanna say all of us, a lot of us use them as religiously, if not more so than our children.
Mhm.
So there's this sort of mixed message, but wait a minute, you have your phone. Why can't I have my phone? I think it's such a great question. The answer is I would have not given my daughter a phone as early, and I gave it to her super early,
Yeah.
embarrassingly early.
Yeah.
I also wouldn't have allowed the iPad to be a babysitter.
Thank
I
you.
would not have
Mhm.
100% because that's where it started.
Mhm. Yeah. And
That's
I
where it
think most
started.
parents with young kids are maybe not most, but a lot of parents with young kids are not doing that anymore. And I think in 10 or 15 years, we're going to look at that like a kid smoking. I
Yeah.
mean, I hope, that's the,
No, I think you're right about that. I
yeah.
do. I think that the damage is significant, and what it does is it creates whatever it does in the mind, right? That
Yeah.
says this is normal. But we've had this hyper normalization going on.
Yeah.
So on things that are not normal.
Yeah. Gabor Mate, I just saw a video of him talking about how brain scans show kids 3, 4, and under who use iPads a lot or screens, their brains are damaged. The
Yeah,
brain development
they're
has been
changed for
diminished. And
sure. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And I, as a parent, taking the devices out of the equation, I think there was a lot that I learned from making Anxious Nation, right?
Yeah.
I didn't realize, had no idea that the things that I thought were coming from a place of love were
Mhm.
actually causing more of a problem.
Mm.
And so, really figuring out a common language was very important. And that to me is critical, whether you're talking about devices or anything else in and around our mental well being.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
having a common language that is used throughout the home, because very often what happens also is you have siblings, right?
Mhm.
And, one child is more affected by anxiety than say another that just doesn't seem to be affected by it.
Mhm.
And there's fallout from that too, because the child with anxiety tends to get more attention. And whether it's negative or
Mhm.
positive, right?
Mhm. Right.
They're getting more attention. I just think having a common language is really important when we talk about our mental well-being.
Okay. And I wonder what tips you have for parents briefly in this time we have, how we can break the cycle if you are a parent that struggles with anxiety or think you might, and you want to make sure you're not imprinting that onto your child. What tips you have for parents there?
Well, I mean, I think you have to be really honest, right?
Mm.
I think and it's very hard, but if you know that you feel a certain way, you feel that way, and that is how you are presenting to these little sponges that soak up everything we say and do,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
The first thing I would say is as a family, it has to be systemic. It has to be the entire family needs to come together and get on the same page. It's critical. It's critical for everybody's well being. So, whether that's a family therapist, family meetings, meeting with your pastor, meeting, whatever it is, it's
Mhm.
hypercritical that it is systemic. It can't just be like, oh, hey, I'm going to work on my mental health, but you're not going to,
Okay.
right? Because we
Everyone's
have these
together on this.
where everyone's together on it, and I
Mhm.
and I think it's the way that we also show our kids that this does not have to define who you are,
Mhm.
right? I think when
Yeah.
the kids get labeled and a kid doesn't wanna be defined by their anxiety or their sadness or, their whatever it is that they feel, they any more than they wanna be, defined by being, "Oh, that's the piano player."
Mhm.
They wanna be who they are, and so I think it's really important. I think simple things. We do After I started making the movie, we started doing tech-free Sundays. It was a big thing in our house, and it was helpful.
Yeah.
And my daughter's friends actually came over and liked it. So I had one of those little cages we could lock their phones in, and it wasn't really
Mhm.
locked, but it was
Yeah.
all for show, right? But they tended to like it. And you know what? We live at the beach. You know what they did? Instead of hanging out in her room, they
Right.
went to the beach.
Right.
Went
Right. Right.
outside. They rode their e-bikes. They went and went boogie boarding and
Mhm.
doing what kids are supposed to be doing. Get
Mhm.
outside, connecting with nature, put
Yeah.
your feet in the grass, in the sand, whatever it is, it's called grounding, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And these are easy things. They don't cost money. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter what kind of access you have. We all have access to the outdoors.
Well, back to having play dates and being in the house that doesn't allow the phones, maybe the kids will actually realize that they're having more fun at the house that doesn't allow access to their phones, right? And maybe they'll wanna hang out at your house more.
Yeah, I mean, in all fairness, at 17, it's really hard to
Okay,
police it,
okay.
you
I'm
know?
just gonna have
Yeah,
blind
no,
hope.
but the girls did come over, right?
Okay,
And,
yeah.
and so her friends came over and that was nice, but, it's very hard to police it at 17
Mhm.
they police if it's going to be policed, it's policed by them at this point,
Okay,
right?
okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And I mean, it sounds like your kids are a little bit younger, but,
Yeah, yeah,
it's and your kids will have better habits than my daughter did because you're
yeah.
giving them and it's the same thing we were talking about in terms of putting tools in the toolbox, right?
Mm,
There's all different kinds of tools to put in that toolbox,
mhm,
not just emotional, right? It's also what do we do with our time? How do we
mhm.
connect with others? That is a tool in the toolbox. And
Yeah,
connection is everything. If you really want to battle this crisis, this epidemic of loneliness and isolation,
mhm,
the antidote to that is connection and
mhm, yeah,
community, right?
100%.
But having conversations like this, Nikki, is everything
Mhm,
because
yeah,
families, even now, feel like they're alone. One of the things that I know when people watch Anxious Nation, they feel seen and heard.
yeah.
They now know it wasn't just happening in their home. And that's why I made that film.
I wanna touch on a couple more things. You talked about or maybe one of the therapists did, how anxiety is just energy, and what's important is how we use it, so you can apply energy to healthy things. So can you talk a little bit to that?
Sure. The tagline for our film is, it's called Anxious Nation and it's harnessing anxious energy for good.
Mhm,
Think of an athlete. I'll give you a great example. Novak Djokovic is playing in Wimbledon, right?
mhm,
He takes all of his anxiety, and he has anxiety. He takes all of that anxiety and he repurposes it to performance on the court. We see it in actors. Barbara Streisand is notoriously, I don't know if your listeners know who Barbara Streisand is, but
I hope
she's
so.
notoriously has stage fright.
Uh-huh,
Right?
okay.
But she will take that energy and she'll go out into the stage and she'll put it into her performance.
Mm,
So we see it so often with kids who sketch and doodle and paint and dance and act and do a sport, especially anxious kids, they tend to do better when they're doing something like that, taking
mhm,
that energy and repurposing it.
yeah,
And that's why in the film, I'm sure you noticed the artwork in the film. The artwork in the film, for anybody who hasn't seen the movie, the artwork in the film was curated from kids from all over the world. We did not ask anyone to paint something specific to a scene. We actually created the storyline around the artwork.
oh,
It is
wow,
genuinely how kids are feeling.
yeah,
And it's really powerful. But the artwork in and of itself tells you this is how I'm coping. I'm
mhm,
taking my feelings and I'm painting or I'm drawing or I'm doing whatever I'm doing. I'm
yeah,
making, short films or, the kids in the movie recorded themselves a lot. I got content that we wouldn't have gotten if I put a camera crew in front of them.
yeah. I wanna share something personal here. My daughter likes to, like, write music, so she'll, like, write out lyrics and sing, and I told her how and I kind of hesitated to do this because I think it's ingrained in me to not talk about if I feel anxious, but I realized I should, and so I said, "Last night, actually, I was feeling really anxious and kind of lonely." And so I just wrote and I ended up kind of writing some poems and it felt really good. And she was like, "Can I read them?" And I said, "No, you can't read them." And then the next day, she had a piece of paper and she goes, "Mommy, this is how I'm feeling." And she just went like scribbled like crazy. And I was like, "Okay, how, can we talk about that a little bit more?" And she wasn't really able to even verbalize how she was feeling. It was just crazy with the movement of the
Encourage her to keep doing that because
yeah.
it's a great outlet, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And it's taking her anxiety
Mhm.
or whatever it was that she was feeling,
Yeah.
and it's giving her a place to put it.
Right. I know.
And that's everything. Listen, you're not gonna stop your kid from feeling anxious. It's in her
Mhm.
DNA.
Mhm.
But you can teach her how to manage it so it doesn't manage her.
Mhm.
And, and you're doing a great job by some of the rules that you're setting around devices and social media.
Yeah.
And I think it's so great that you actually told her that you were feeling anxious and lonely
Mhm.
because kids need to now that's normalization that I am in chart and in favor of, right?
Okay. Right.
If
Good.
we normalize the conversation
Yeah.
right?
And put
Because
words to it, right, too.
put words to it, but also don't make it an icky thing.
Mhm.
Right? Don't
Mhm.
make it a scary thing, don't make it an icky thing. I remember we were at a screening, I think it was sometime like in April, we were invited to go to Chicago, and it was an elementary school that was hosting a screening of our film, which you
Mhm.
can do if you're interested in bringing it to
Mm.
your community.
Mhm.
And, there was a woman who was like, I haven't been able to watch it. I haven't been I'm so nervous. I'm so like, I just know it's gonna," you know. Once she watched the film, she came up to me afterwards and she said, "I don't know why I created this scenario in my head,
Mhm.
that this was just gonna be too hard." She's
Right.
like, "Yeah, you know,"
Mm.
and that's what we do sometimes,
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
know, and also because you wanna protect your child,
Mm.
right? So we just don't talk about it. But you
Yeah.
have to. There's a great cartoon in the an old cartoon, we use those all throughout the film, about Fred, about naming the anxiety, and
Uh-huh.
it's the airplane where the wheels and the wings fall off and, you
Mhm.
know,
Yeah.
and but giving it a name,
Mhm.
normalizing it,
Yeah.
because everyone has anxiety.
Yeah.
Right? And the more we
Sure.
normalize it, the better we can deal with it.
Yeah, and these conversations are so important, and
Mhm.
is there anything else you wanna end with regarding advice for parents that we didn't touch on yet?
Well, I mean, obviously, I feel very strongly that our film is a great tool for parents. We have a
Mhm.
on our website, anxiousnation.com, we have a guide that if you watch the film and you wanna talk to your family about it, we have a guide that helps you talk about it. I think it's really important that we look at this from 360 degrees, right? I know your podcast is brilliantly focused on, you know, the effects of social media and the devices, which is a huge piece of the pie, no question, but it
Yeah.
is not the whole pie.
Right,
And I
right.
think that we have to look at the whole pie. And if you can retrain your brain, you know, to exercise, to learn your anxious patterns, right?
Mhm.
To understand avoidance, because that's
Mhm.
what we do a lot, right? We
Yeah.
avoidance, because avoidance makes anxiety worse. Make a list of behave like safety behaviors. What can I do,
Mhm.
like, what can I do to feel safe? What can I, you know, I can, so I know if I'm gonna scribble in a notebook, or if I'm gonna write, or I'm gonna journal, or I'm gonna paint, or I'm gonna sing, or I'm gonna go for a run,
Yeah.
those are good things, whether you're a parent or a child,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, and when you're
So
feeling that way, it's not
gratitude,
going to your
yeah,
phone. Not going on
yeah.
your phone when you feel that way.
Right. None of it was going to your phone, right?
Yeah,
And,
right.
you know, we did an event in New York, last fall, and it was about the intersection of tech and mental
Mhm.
health.
Mhm.
And what I was so happy and surprised to learn, because my daughter was on a panel of Gen Zs. They don't want the apps. They
Isn't that
do not,
amazing?
yeah,
I
they don't
know.
wanna. They're
And
like,
they
"I
want to
don't
give it
want."
to their kids.
Yep. Like, there was a young man who was 21.
Mhm.
He, like, was selling his 3rd tech company at 20,
Oh,
right?
wow,
And he
yeah.
said, "When I was 16 and I would, you know, I was in bed having, like, an anxiety or panic attack and realizing," he's like, "the last thing I wanted to do was go on my phone." He's like, "This is not the answer."
Mhm.
So I was so happy and, like, excited to see that that generation is turning their back on some of this stuff. Now, if
Yeah.
you're an entrepreneur trying to, you know, break in and say, like, "Here, you know, here's resources for you," I get
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
But that generation is really reticent. Like, you know, we're more apt to use an apt to use
Mhm.
an app,
Right,
right?
right, good one, yeah.
Than my daughter, than, you know, the Gen Zs.
Yeah.
And they'll use
Wow.
apps for a lot of things, but they don't wanna use it for their mental health. And I
Good.
find that really fascinating. Yeah, and I think it's movement in the right direction.
And
Yeah,
a
so
self-correction, right?
yeah,
That will happen, but we have this time now where parents with kids that are young or still in school are needing to recognize these behaviors, and they are in the film, I'll end with this quote, like, "They're walking a path that we never walked, but they are not alone," and I think what we haven't walked is the exposure to all of the world's news and all of the people online and all of the bad things and bad content, and that's exacerbating this whole problem that already existed, and
it
so
is. We've always the world's always been a little bit of a scary place. We've
yeah.
lived through a lot, right?
Mhm.
And, you know, we're celebrating 250 years this year as a country.
Mhm.
And, you know, they've been challenged years, many of them, but
Yeah.
we've lived through them, right?
Mhm.
So, you know, I think we have to get back to some of the basics. I think, you know, connecting as a family, connecting as a community, because I think we've lost that connection as a community.
Mhm.
And, you know, a lot of people will look at it. We talked a little bit about it in the film. There's a falling away from religion. This is not a religious conversation, okay?
Mhm.
but there is a falling away from religion in this country where the fastest growing religion is no religion at all. What that did was it took people out of the town square, right? Because where would you go to connect with like-minded people?
Right.
Church on Sunday, synagogue on Friday, whatever, you're at the mosque, wherever you're going.
Mhm.
And so a lot of people are just not doing that. And what's interesting is this younger generation, they turned away from their parents' religion, but what they've turned to is mindfulness and things where they can still connect,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah.
they go and they do yoga and they do. So there's a lot of ways to look at this. And we talk a little bit about this in the film. So I really hope that whoever's listening will take the time to watch Anxious Nation. It's on Amazon Prime. It's on Apple TV. You can get it on Google Play. Nobody watches it on Google Play, but we always mention it. But we are really happy that this film is making a difference in people's lives. What it will 100% do is give you the foundation to have some really great conversations in your
Mhm.
home. And that's where
Yeah.
it starts.
Yeah, and I think it's relevant to every single family, whether or not you think that your child has anxiety, whether you or not you think you have anxiety. I think we need to be normalizing these conversations as early as possible, though it's never too late. And I thank you for your raw vulnerability and your daughter's vulnerability and sharing her story in this way. I know that can be really difficult to do, and that she's come through it and is doing so many amazing things to help other people through these struggles too, and
And
so
and she struggles with her anxiety every day.
yeah,
But
but
she's still doing this stuff whenever we did the Today Show. Every time we did an interview, that the interviewers would they were all mesmerized by her. She's really amazing, and I'm saying that as her mom, but not saying that as her mom.
sure.
And the first thing they would say to her is, "So, do you have anxiety?" And when she's talking about it, she doesn't have anxiety. That's not what gives her anxiety, right?
Right, right.
Knowing that she's spreading a message of hope is
Matter
everything for her. Yeah,
mhm,
and that's her taking her anxiety and repurposing it.
mhm.
And that's
Incredible.
where, if you have an anxious kid,
Mhm,
teach them to be a messenger.
mhm.
Teach them to talk about it and help their friends.
Yeah. Give them things to direct that energy toward, and helping others is a huge thing, and
Excellent.
that's what gives me so much purpose and energy in what I am able to do, and I'm sure you feel that same way. Even though there's hard times through it, it's helping one family at a time, one child at a time, and again, I'm so, so grateful to you and your family for and the whole team for creating this film. I
Thank
will
you.
link to that in the episode notes and how to connect with you there. So thank you again, Laura, for this time. I really appreciate
Nikki,
you.
thank you. I appreciate you having this conversation.